Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Conscious Caregiving with L&L, where we're tackling the tough conversations. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Conscious Caregiving with L&L. I am your co-host, Lance A. Slatton, also the co-host of the Caregivers Journal and the Care Advocates. I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Miss Lori LeBay. Welcome, Lori.
Well, I am thrilled to be here. So this is going to be a wonderful, wonderful conversation. For those of you that don't know me, I am the founder of Alzheimer's Speaks and co-founder of Dementia Map. And my mom lived with dementia, and I am now caring for two elderly family members. And boy, do I have some examples for you on the whole ageism thing just in the last month here. So looking forward to this conversation. Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome. Always good to see you, Lori. But first, I'd like to welcome our esteemed panel. And I'd like to take a moment and go around and have each of you introduce yourselves. I'll start with Dr. Brittany Lamb. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I'm an emergency medicine physician by training. I've been doing that for about 10 years and very passionate about advanced care planning. My favorite patients are people who are aging. I love the challenge of trying to help them figure out what's best for them when it comes to making decisions about whether or not they're going to stay in the hospital. And I also really see the need for more support in when people are making medical decisions on behalf of someone who's living with dementia. So that's what I've kind of come online to do. That's my passion. And I'm also working as a hospice medical director.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Brittany Lamb, for being here today. Next, we will go to Jeanette Lurd. Welcome, Jeanette. How are you?
Hi. Thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm Jeanette Liardi. I'm a social gerontologist in Portland, Oregon. And I became a social gerontologist in my late 50s because I took care of both my parents in my mid-40s as a caregiver full-time, and it really blew my mind as to how much needed the resources that we need to provide for person-centered care. And so I went back to school, and now I teach on aging issues.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for being with us, Jeanette. Next, we'll go to Dr. Ann Kinney. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me come back again. I am a geriatrician and a palliative care doctor. I cared for my mother living with dementia for several years, and especially at the end of her life, and noticed that the healthcare system and everyone who was taking care of her was reluctant to let her go naturally. I look for resources for my siblings to help them understand the process, and I couldn't find anything. So after she passed, I wrote a book about end-of-life care and dementia called Making Tough Decisions about End-of-Life Care and Dementia for Caregivers. And then more recently, I wrote a book with a colleague of mine who is living with dementia called Your True North. And that's more for people who are living with dementia to make choices for later in their lives and maybe for the end of their lives. And then just another caregiver book with some other colleagues who are MBAs and geriatric care managers about caring around gaming, just to make it a little more lighthearted. But I'm very honored to be here today and to have a full discussion with this great group. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We're honored to have you. Next, we'll go to Mr. David McNally. Welcome.
Yes. Well, thank you. I'm delighted. I recognize a couple of faces here. I think we've been on a panel together before, which is wonderful. So I don't come to this with any medical qualifications. I come from personal experience, having been a caregiver to my wife who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I looked after her for 4 years. My career has been more in the area of personal growth and development, and I've spent that in the business world. I've written several books, and my new book was really motivated by a wonderful piece of advice I got as I was grieving on my wife, and that was, we never move on from someone we love, but we can move forward. And I think that's what's really critical, is to find ways to move forward and still stay fully engaged in life. And so being with all of you is a part of that for me, whatever I can contribute.
Well, thank you for being here and for contributing, David. Next, we'll go to Chris Sundberg. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, thanks so much, Lance and Lori. It's great to be here. I'm Chris Sundberg, and I'm Executive Director and founding member of Elder Voice Advocates. We're a nonprofit that came together in 2017, most of us because we had a parent who was seriously harmed in long-term care. And for myself, when this happened to my dad, I thought surely there's regulatory oversight and accountability. That's when I found out there's precious little of that. So I have applied my background as a lobbyist, public relations, media person, communications to help further the cause here in Minnesota.
Oh, thank you for being with us, Chris, and for the work that you're doing. I want to start our panel off today with Dr. Brittany Lamb. Can I call you Brittany?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Brittany, you're an ER physician. You're a director now of a hospice provider. You're encountering families literally at their most urgent, pressing time and situations and near death, and you're getting all kinds of dynamics from the family, from the patient. In your experience, what are some practical steps that caregivers can take to ensure that their aging loved ones' values and goals for care and of care are prioritized in our healthcare system that often maybe gets overlooked with individualized care for older adults?
Yeah. So I think that being in the ER can be really challenging because every single day I feel like I'm a different version of myself as a doctor based on how busy it is, how sick my patients are, like the overall vibe in the department. So it can be very, very challenging to do the job. And I also see how challenging it is to be on the other side as an advocate and as a caregiver. So I think number one is kind of understanding that if you've not been in the ER, which a lot of people have, and most people living with dementia, most caregivers will wind up in the ER at some point with their person, that it is super dysfunctional. And so the more prepared you can be, the better. So what I tell people to do, like the number one thing is there's lots of things, and this is pretty much what I teach online and my passion these days. But the number one thing that I think is really understanding what the person, whoever we're advocating for, what their values are of quality of life. Like, what does living well mean to them? Do they care about quality of life? Because if you know that, then you can make most medical decisions like with someone, helping them or on their behalf if you're their decision maker. So I strongly recommend kind of coming into unplanned needs of care with a kind of overall goal of care for the person. So are we focusing on prolonging life? Are we focusing on maximizing, maintaining current quality of life? Or are we really now focusing more on comfort? Because you're going to wind up coming to the hospital with all of those goals, even someone whose goal of care is comfort. And if you can't like verbalize that and advocate for the person, the standard protocols and policies and procedures of the hospital will just be in motion and take effect. And your person may wind up receiving care that they would not want. So that's like the number one thing, is really having conversations either with the person or with yourself or other family members or friends on their behalf about like, what does living well mean to this person, and do they value quality of life?
Yeah. And, I want to piggyback on that for just a moment. Oftentimes families don't know what they don't know too, right? Mm-hmm. And so when they're coming into an emergency room situation and it is life-threatening and it is critical, they're overwhelmed to begin with. And so they often don't know, because they don't know, they're not experienced in this. For those of us that have healthcare backgrounds, to us it's more natural. But for a lay person or a person that's in, finance or something, they don't know to ask about all of these different things. And they're not often presented to the patient or the family either. So what are some of the most important questions that caregivers should ask healthcare providers to ensure that their loved one's care is aligned with their values and not shaped by assumptions about their age or their cognitive abilities or lack thereof? Like, how do they package that up so when they're in those crucial situations, they're prepared to know what to ask and what's available and things like that?
Yeah, so I think outside of the hospital, when you're meeting with doctors, there's less pressure in an office setting. I think some of the things that you can ask about are, what are the most likely things that are going to happen to my person that's going to wind up putting us in a situation where I have to speak on their behalf and make medical decisions for them? Like, what are their medical risks? I think it's important to realize that you have more control than what you're maybe realizing. And as someone's advocate and decision maker, we really need you to disrupt our protocols and our kind of standard and the routine thing that we do for people if that's not what's best for them. Like, we need to be told. And I know that doesn't really sound fair, but I think sometimes telling us that it's okay to start talking about like what's okay and what's not okay can be really, really helpful when you're a physician or a nurse practitioner, physician assistant. So like outside of the hospital, I would say starting to ask about what's most likely going to happen to my person. What do I need to kind of think about ahead of time? And then inside of the hospital, or even also in the office setting, I think saying, hey, look, like, I know my person has this underlying medical problem, but I'm curious to know what are all the available options for managing this situation? And are you recommending things differently because my person's living with dementia? You know, if my person wasn't living with dementia, would you offer a different plan, or would you make different recommendations, just to kind of figure out whether or not they are changing their plan or offering you different things because of their bias, or because of what assumptions they're making about your family dynamics or the person's situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So what advice would you give the families trying to balance respecting their loved one's autonomy while also making decisions in their loved one's best interests as their cognitive or their physical abilities decline?
Yeah, so I think for that, it's if you're trying to make sure that the person's voice is heard. And I think it's important for people to understand capacity. And so that I teach this to folks. We need to know whether or not the person has decision making for medical decisions capacity. And so if your person has lost that ability, the medical team needs to know. But if your person still has that ability, the medical team also needs to know, so that we can slow down and involve them in the conversation. Maybe ask for more time to make this decision if possible. Is there time, But capacity, just like really briefly, in order to have the ability to make medical decisions, you have to understand your current health situation, this new medical situation, like what's actually going on. You have to be able to hear and listen to the different treatment options, weigh out the pros and cons and risk and benefits of those treatment options, how those options would apply to your life, and then make a decision and be able to kind of explain why you're making that decision. That's what having the ability to make medical decisions, that's what our brain has to do. And so I want to empower families to really look at whether or not, if you're an advocate or a decision maker, really look at whether or not your person has capacity, so that if they don't, you can say that. And if they do, you can also say that. So, yeah.
And Brittany, the panel today is about ageism. In your experience, how does ageism impact medical decision making? So for people who are aging and for those living with dementia, what steps can these individuals take to advocate effectively within the healthcare system?
Yeah, so I am obviously like in a different demographic than all of you. As a younger person, I've not experienced ageism, but I've seen it in my patients. And I also want to say too that I come at this from the lens of working in the ER. So one of my parents has passed away. He had a brain tumor and died on hospice. My mom is in her 60s, so I haven't experienced that with my parents. Or with really my grandparents either, because I wasn't involved in their medical decisions. But in the ER, what I think happens is two things. It's either a person comes in and they're aging, and the team is like, okay, they have a high level of medical risk. So my kind of bias is to do more and to put them in the hospital because their risk is high. And so I see that a lot. I see a lot of my colleagues, we're really busy and pressed for time. And so we put people in the hospital because their risk is higher when they're aging of having medical complications. I also see people looking at people who are aging in situations in which they're sick, they're injured, and they're not well. They're not doing well that day. They're struggling, and they're not maybe the best. Maybe not the best version of themselves. Like, it appears that they have poor quality of life, essentially, or it might appear that way to certain people if they have biases. And so there may be this bias towards doing less because of how sick someone looks and how they're kind of the provider is kind of saying that, well, maybe this person's living with poor quality of life, so maybe we should do less. And so that, like, less life prolonging care is what I'm meaning. And so I see that bias as well.
Yeah. Real quick before I give it over to Lori here, I just want to follow up. So, I hear everything you're saying, but yet I hear from families, and I've read statistics, and you, Dr. Kinney, can, correct me and show me where I'm wrong. But this is just based on what I've heard and seen. You're saying, they're going to do less, but yet I hear from families that we serve and from, articles I've read, but yet most doctors won't recommend hospice. And I'm right on this, right? Why will they do all that, but yet they can't provide this wonderful resource that won't cost the family anything either, provide them with more support, more comfort measures. They'll do that, but yet they won't take that final step and recommend, have you considered maybe, admitting your loved one in the hospice? Why is that, Brittany?
I mean, I can only speak from the ER perspective. So I think a lot of ER physicians and hospital-based physicians feel like the goals of care discussions and these types of decisions should not happen in crisis moments. Like, families are not prepared, they're not ready, they can't handle that information. I also think a lot of physicians don't understand what hospice does and the difference between hospice and palliative care. I mean, people who are living with diseases that are impacting their day-to-day quality of life, which we know could be life-limiting, they should all have access to palliative care. It's a scarce resource in a lot of places, and then we should all be able to tell patients the difference between palliative care and hospice. There's a ton of education that needs to happen on the physician side. Sure. I'll also say, from what I've noticed in the healthcare system, that primary care doctors no longer come to the hospital anymore. So the doctors outside of the hospital don't have as much skin in the game, if you will, to talk about these things like ahead of the need of them from a medical standpoint emergently. So that's kind of how I see it. But there's a lot of problems, and that's one of them.
Yeah, I will say, I know here in Michigan, one of our families, their primary care doc will still round at the local hospital, which I think is fantastic, because they're going to know their patient better than the attending or the house doc will. But Dr. Brittany Lamb, thank you so much for bringing your voice and experience to this conversation. Right now, I want to go over to Lori.
Great. I'm just going to piggyback a little bit on Brittany. One of the other things that I think is really interesting, kind of with aging and ageism and outcomes, that I saw in the hospital and in the clinics with doctors, was they assume if someone is social, they comprehend. Mm-hmm. And that is such a huge, massive mistake. And I have been like screaming and yelling. It's like, how many times do I have to tell you, primary contact is here? This, the appointments have to go this way. And, I had that happen the other day, where they called somebody who is not formally diagnosed with dementia, but definitely has it. And she spun for an hour and a half. And, her diabetes numbers went off the charts because of the stress. And it's like, I've had this conversation 45 times. And as a family member, it's really, really frustrating. So I think, again, when it comes to ageism, there can be the things where you don't get the care, but then there's the assumption of, oh, you look fine, and so they're not really always, in my opinion, reading the file, or the communication isn't being passed from one staff person to another in those things. So I'll leave it at that. I'm going to go to David next. David, I've known you through the speaking industry, and you are just have such fabulous insights. I knew a little bit about your journey with your wife and dementia, and how proactive and beautiful that whole process was with you. But I want to start out first with, what do you feel, and what have you discovered yourself is kind of the number one challenge that most people have when they age?
Um, well, first of all, what we're talking about, anything to do with health, is always front and center as we age. We understand that, but beyond health, when it comes to the greatest challenge, I think it was answered in an interview I did with a senior executive, a retired man who was very wealthy, run one of the biggest companies here in Minnesota, public company, and he had retired. And I asked him, "How are you enjoying retirement?" And he said, "It's challenging." And I thought to myself, my God, you could fly on a private jet anywhere in the world. How is it now challenging? And he said, one word: relevance. The word relevance. And I think as we get older and we move into the next act of our lives, that becomes very, very key. And I think it's reflected in all the studies, whether you that come out. The Stanford College of Education did a great study on the question that you asked, and it really comes down to purpose. To have a sense of purpose as we get older, and one can interpret that in different ways. A compelling reason to get up in the morning, but a reason to continue to live. And so, how I work with that is simply to put purpose and contribution together, and help us understand that as we get older, that we still have much to contribute. Whether that's our wisdom, that's whether our skills, and so if we can do that and find ways to contribute, that in itself provides a lot of purpose and meaning to our lives.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think one of the tough things that families have is when they are caring for someone, maybe someone is starting to need some assistance. It could be cleaning the house or grocery shopping or medical appointments and financing. I mean, it could be anything. And we take over instead of being inclusive. And, to me, it's a lot of times it's like, it's just easier if I just do it myself. It's faster because everyone's life is so busy, but it really has a huge impact on how we're making our older adults feel. And, because I've seen that, I've heard that through multiple support groups where people will say, I don't have a purpose. I don't have a say. And I just think, oh my gosh, if I felt that way, I would be like livid. And then I would go right into depression. Like, why bother? And that is just massively important, how we treat people in terms of dignity, and really looking at, is it worth it to speed this process up and make somebody feel less than? And I think it's easily done, where we just go into that mode. And I think we have to have conversations like this to really talk about, how are we making people feel? Because to me, that's the crux of it all. When we are dealing with somebody's will to live, or feeling valued, or feeling like they belong and fit in. And, the number one cause right now in elderly, they're saying, is the isolation and feeling alone. And that's a really simple way that we can kind of modify that. So thank you for bringing that up. I think sometimes that's overlooked in this conversation, very much. The other question I wanted to ask you was, how do we create more joy in our lives? Because again, as we age, and not everyone, but many people have more medical issues, or they start having mobility issues, speech issues, hearing issues, all of those types of things that come into play with our lives. And they can kind of pull us away, or there can be an embarrassment where we don't want people to know. How do we create more more joy for ourselves as we age, and how do we help create joy for our older adults in our lives as well, if it's family or professional?
Yes. Well, again, let me refer to a couple of studies and people who are much more competent than I am in the whole area of joy. But ironically, in the last week, the Surgeon General, as he's moving on, said he talked about joy, and he said the number one catalyst for having more joy in our lives is our relationships. And so when you talk about loneliness, I think that's a very key factor, is that how do we shift from being isolated to developing relationships, becoming a part of community, and there are many out there. The thing is, it's not like we can say, and maybe in your work that you have discovered that as well. There are many opportunities, but we have to take the initiative, either individually or we have to do it with some help. The Mayo Clinic just came out with a study. I referred to it in my book. The fact that that there is no pill or anything that can help a person live longer more than strong social connections. So as we get older, there is joy in being in creating. There is joy in still having things to achieve and things to learn. And my personal example is that several years ago, I put my own teachings into practice. That teaching is, what I call the one day I'm gonna list. We all have one day I'm gonna do this, one day I'm gonna do that. So I was just about to approach my 72nd birthday, and I said, "Well, what's on the top of your list?" And I said, "Go to college." I look at all of you out there and I go, wow, all of these people I'm on the panel with, you're so well educated. And I was a high school graduate, so I thought, yeah, well, you better get going. You're going to be 72. So I registered through some friends at the University of Minnesota, where I live in Minnesota, right? And I became a freshman. Now, and I started that fall, and oh, you talk about joy. I mean, the joy of being in the classroom with those young people was just phenomenal. Now I'm challenged because I can only do 3 credits a semester. So I will be 94 when I graduate, but I do invite you all to my graduation ceremony. So joy comes in different ways. I think it comes in social connections and still endeavoring to look at what can I accomplish, what can I achieve.
I
Yeah,
love
but
that.
yeah, yeah. I want to go back to the experience of my wife because she was a very joyful person. And what impacted her joy was as her executive functioning started to diminish, she started to see herself as terribly incompetent. She was a teacher, and now she's dealing with this feeling of being incompetent. So emotionally, it was very difficult for her. But the counter situation for her was her friends helped her sustain her joy in life. So she was very fortunate that she had a lot of strong social connections.
Yeah, yeah, and your wife was very joyful. Just
Yeah.
even through her death and dying process, she was so adamant about this is going to be good. We're gonna make the best of this, and it was just absolutely beautiful. One of the things with joy, and I'm just going to pop this in, is to me, I think our micromanaging of people, of work, has limited significantly the relationship based care we give one another in our interactions. And I think that's had a huge impact on ageism, because it doesn't allow, like when you went to school, it was like, oh, I'm with these young people and I'm hearing different voices and we're learning together and all of those things. It puts us in a box, and it limits a lot of that stuff because it doesn't give us time to be human with one another. And to me, that has really built more stigmas and made it more difficult to work around this. I did want to ask you, David, have you personally ever felt where someone was discriminating against you or had a wrong opinion of you because of your age?
That's a good one. Well, where I see it more than anything else today is in the speaking industry, right? So here, what you've got. So most people who hire a speaker will do it because of their a video. They'll take a look at the speaking video and they will decide. Well, when you're 78 years of age and you're competing against, dynamic 40, 50-year-olds even, that's it. So I have experienced ageism. I had a committee of a major company want me to be their keynote speaker, and took the recommendation to their CEO, and he or she, they didn't say who it was, said, we don't want an old white guy as our keynote speaker. Now, I was understanding of that because that was when diversity was first coming out, and there was a big push towards diversity. So if that is an example, that's the best one I can come up with now. Yeah.
Okay, great. What do you think we can do as individuals to be responsible to kind of squelch ageism as a whole? How do we help people get over that hump?
Well, I don't know whether we can help others squelch ageism, but what I do feel is that, again, I like to use the term elders. That as elders in society, that what is the lens through which we're looking at our lives, and most importantly, what is our responsibilities? And one of my favorite television shows is Finding Your Roots on PBS. I don't know whether any of my other guests or the other guests have seen it, but they look back at celebrities' ancestors. The point being that most of us know who our grandparents are, but when we start to go much beyond that, great grandparent, there's very little we know. So the show takes us back. What happens as a result of that, however, is often the result of the discovery is this, that when the celebrity is asked, what did they learn from this? What comes up very, very often is that the opportunities that I have today is because of the sacrifices they made, my ancestors made. So what I endeavor to do is bring that into the work today and say, as elders, what is our responsibility, or what are our responsibilities? In other words, if we all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, our shoulders strong enough for others to stand upon them and to go into the future. So I believe that there is a responsibility that we have to do the very best we can to make the world better than when we entered it. It's obviously a significant thing, and people say, "But I'm just a drop in the ocean," and then I respond, "But Mother Teresa said, yes, but without that drop, there would be no ocean." So it's all philosophical and all of that, obviously.
Yeah, you have a saying on your website about we have a choice, are we going to expand or are we going to contract as we age? And to me, that was just so powerful, because it is, are we going to continue to learn? Are we going to continue to participate, or are we just going to curl up in a ball and just let the world pass us by? Because when we do that, to me, that adds to ageism. People looking at that going, there's not a value there. They don't want to participate or they can't participate. And when you mentioned about going back to school, I loved that, because I think the intergenerational interaction and experience allows us to see the value of one another at all ages. I hate when we categorize people, because I think it's just so limiting. I get where we need to do that, especially in medical and all the data tracking. Everybody's got to be categorized, but we lose that human experience of the value, the voice, the listening, the expansion of, oh, this is how we used to do it. And, now, and they're shocked. Really? You used to do that. And now we have this. And then, the ability to teach one another, I think is just such a beautiful way. And, to me, I would really encourage people to stay involved in life, to be an active role model, kind of lead by example of how you want to be treated as you age. And, we have to take that into consideration when we're caring or dealing with someone else. And I think sometimes we forget about how we would like to be treated, and we just make some assumptions on someone else's life. So thank you very much, David. I really appreciate all of your wonderful input. Lance, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Thank you, Lori. I want to go to Chris. And Chris, you're currently the executive director of Elder Voice Advocates, or EVA. So you probably have a lot of input and insights into this issue on ageism. But I want to talk to you about, how is ageism reflected in your work?
Well, the only reason Elder Voice exists is because of ageism. It's because of our ageist attitudes. We don't provide adequately in our long-term care system, our governmental oversight system, and our reimbursement systems, etc. And, it's interesting too, because I just took a look. I just did a Google search and just said prosecution of a daycare provider in Minnesota, for 2024, and three cases came up, very roughing up kids, that sort of thing in daycare. Then I went to the same query, only for doggy daycare centers. Same thing, a number of incidents come up, and where they've been prosecuted. So then I did it for long-term care providers, who's been not a darn thing, nothing. But when you look at the data, just in 2024 and 2023, there were 26 substantiated investigations that the neglect resulted in a death. But yet you see nothing in the media about that. So we tend to bury those things. And in this case, ignorance is not bliss. We need to be very much aware of the reality of our current long-term care system. And there are good providers. So I don't want to have people think that they're all terrible. But it is a bit of a buyer beware. And it's kind of the whole reason we created Elder Care IQ, a screening tool that we have for people. So our advocacy work is to try to educate public policymakers, families. We work a lot with the media to try to help with that education and that advocacy work. And then we are lobbying the legislature to improve regulatory oversight. And people often go and point fingers, well, it's the Department of Health. They should do much better than what they are doing. Yeah, I agree with that. However, the legislature gives them the resources or not. And our state, every state in the nation, underfunds anything having to do with elders. We have a very fragmented governmental system that it just undermines the effectiveness that we could be achieving. So everything we do is because of ageism.
Yeah. I want to, before I go to my next question, Chris, America is one of the only or one of the few cultures that doesn't revere their elderly. When you look at Asian, European, South American, do you have a thought on why our culture kind of goes against what the rest of the world does with their elderly and senior population?
Well, this isn't data that, proven, but I mean, we've got an adoration for the youth culture and always have. And the older you get, the more worthless you are. And what's interesting in the long-term care arena, a lot of immigrant people coming from cultures that do respect their elders give far better care than some of our young people in the same settings, too.
Yeah, I asked that because I see this in my day-to-day job, and I don't know if our two doctors on the panel, if they experience this in their settings, but we'll have a family and they might be from India or they might be from Asia. They're hiring us to take care of their grandmother or their grandfather, and we're there. We might be there 24/7, but yet the family is still there taking care of them, even though they've hired us to take care of them. They say, well, no, this is our duty to do this in our culture, even though they have us there to provide the more skilled level care. I just find it fascinating, that you would think it would be almost the opposite or the same, that we would revere and hold our seniors and our elderly up in the same, esteem as other cultures. But I want to talk a little bit about the future too, Chris. What does our future look like if we continue with the same biases that we have now towards our, elderly population?
Well, first of all, we've got a rapidly aging population. We continue these practices, the abuse and neglect is only going to get worse. The needless suffering and death is only going to get worse. So we really need to try to be solution driven. The quality of life is going to be impacted. People want to live in their homes or the community of their choice.
Right.
We make that very difficult because we don't have affordable housing. We don't have affordable health care. We don't have transportation access or easy access. So there's so many fundamental things that we don't have to accommodate a person as they age. But if you compare that to what we do to make sure children are accommodated, it's a far different story. So we need to actually realize, again, I come back to ignorance isn't bliss. We have to realize the realities of this aging population, and leaving things continue as we are only leads to a lot more problems and a lot more expense down the road for our society.
Yeah, absolutely. That's for sure. Let's talk a little bit about EVA, or the Elder Voice Advocates. What kind of work are you doing? You mentioned some of it previously, to really address these issues caused by ageism.
Well, we kind of started out with Minnesota was the only state to not license assisted living providers. So we started on that course to get licensing, and that was in 2017, 2018. As a part of that, then we worked a great deal with the media. We try to give voice to elders, let them tell their stories. And that's what really helped grow awareness and empathy, I guess, for the situation where we were in. The Star Tribune did a 5-day series in November of 2017, right after we got formed and got all these stories before him. As a result, the then governor of the state called in the advocates, AARP, Alzheimer's, Elder Justice, Legal Aid, and then us, this brand new little organization. And the reason we were there twofold. We were willing to tell the stories of what's actually happening. And as a result, the governor said, give me some recommendations for legislation. We did more than that. We got together. We actually wrote legislation. He took every word of it, had a bill introduced. We were not successful getting it passed in 2018, but we were in 2019. Then we worked very carefully during the rulemaking process. One of our founding members is an expert elder law attorney. So with her input, I think we created a lot better laws on the book. I think the thing I've learned, however, is as good as our laws are, they're only good if they're enforced. And that's where we're starting to see a slippage. So we'll always continue on the public policy arena. One of the other interesting, I think that's point on to this discussion is we got a bill passed to create a legislative task force on aging. That task force just finished its work. The report is being submitted today. And the recommendation, we were hoping that what we would get out of that is the creation of a department on aging. The political realities aren't going to allow that. Although 2 years ago, Minnesota created a department for children, youth, and families. They found the resources, no problem. But now for elders, oh my goodness, we cannot, that's way too much money for us to expend. So it's a watered down version, but it is something. Probably the thing that I'm most proud of is the creation of elder care IQ. And what we have done with that tool is take the Department of Health's investigations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation for every licensed provider in the state, hospitals, nursing homes, assisted living, memory care, etc. And that's publicly available information. If you can access it, I can't tell you enough because I'm fairly computer competent, internet competent. It's a nightmare. Well, we have actually somebody I knew, a retired successful tech entrepreneur who said, I can fix that. And within 3 days, he had a framework put together and less than $50,000, we launched a easy to use, highly effective means for people to get the information they need. At least it's not the be all end all, but at least it gives you a clue as to the history of possible care issues. We're adding more data sources as it goes. The Department of Health has thrown millions of dollars and still has a very cumbersome, very hard to use system, if you're even aware of it. So I'll stop at that. I could go on, but that's enough.
No, that's okay. Before we move on, I just want to ask, what do you advise people to do who might be watching or listening to this if they feel like they or one of their loved ones has been a victim to ageism?
First thing to do is report it. And I know that's difficult, and I know people feel shamed about it, but the first thing, call the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center. That's your first stop in making a complaint. That's in the Department of Health. They'll then get it to the Office of Health Facilities Complaints. But I've got to give you a caveat. They only investigate 15%, 15% of the complaints that are given. So precious little gets actually investigated. Or call us, Elder Voice Advocates.
What's the phone number?
952-239-6394. We'll help anybody get through this, whether they're trying to find a place or they're trying to deal with retaliations, poor care, whatever it might be. We're happy. Each situation's so unique, so we're happy to help wherever we can.
Thank you. And real quick before I toss it back to Lori, I know you shared the information for contacting in Minnesota. What if people are in other states? Do they call their DHS, or who is it that they contact in other?
I would start with their departments of health. That should give you your first avenue. There might be Google's a wonderful thing. Just Google it and see what you find out.
Thank you, Chris. And Lori, we'll go back to you.
Well, I am going to go to Jeanette, and I'm really excited to talk with you, given the book that you've done and all the articles you've written on this topic and things. But I want to start out in terms of, as a society, what has gone wrong with aging? What aren't we getting here?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I believe that the basic thing that we get wrong about aging is that we see aging as nothing but a process of deterioration and decline. That we reach a certain point, and then after that, we're just going to start gradually falling apart in all aspects of our lives. So that's the main thing we get wrong as a society about aging. And as was mentioned before, we are a youth-centered culture. We basically value, in general, anything that's young is good and anything that's old is not good. But I would say that the main reason behind this, and to address the question of why our society as opposed to other societies, I think because our society is so much based on capitalism that individual productivity is our greatest value, and consumer spending and corporate profit making are our greatest goals. And so when we are focused on productivity, then we seem to want to expect people to remain as productive as possible. And when they no longer meet our standards of what being productive is, then they can just go and disappear somewhere. And we're not valued for the different kinds of ways in which we can continue to contribute, as David mentioned before. So that's what we get wrong as a society. The things we value are not sustainable throughout our lives in that way, and shouldn't be sustainable throughout our lives in that way. So that would be why I think we get it wrong, and we need to get it right. And as you mentioned, the book I wrote, which is called Aging Sideways, is to kind of stop looking at aging with these blinders, with these straight ahead and narrow vision. We need to kind of turn sideways every once in a while and get other views and shift our perspectives about getting older.
Oh, I agree. And, when you were talking about how people value, again, to me, it gets back to the kind of that micromanaging in the workplace and stuff of doing it faster. Well, doing it faster, there's a lot of mistakes that people make because they don't have the history of an elder. And an elder might do it slower. And that's not even true a lot of the times. But even if they do, they're doing it properly. So you're not backtracking and undoing and fixing and all of those things. And it amazes me how management doesn't understand that. But again, a lot of our management has turned over to be younger, and that's not been taught in terms of the wisdom. And I think we have in some ways perpetuated, these barriers between different genres in terms of, are we a millennial? Are we this? Are we that? And it was cute in the beginning, but it just seems like everybody attacks the new one on board, all the time. And there seem to be a lot of stigmas along with good things attached to each. But I don't know, we seem to be living in a world where differences are not appreciated. They are looked down on.
Well, and also the generational conflict proves to be, it's manufactured. I think it's really inaccurate to talk about generations because we are all very different. And it's very hard to generalize on large populations. And but a lot of times, again, because of the nature of our capitalist tendencies, people make money off of keeping us afraid of getting older and want us to be in competition with each other. I mean, think of the anti-aging beauty industry. They make billions of dollars of making us afraid for that wrinkle, that first wrinkle that comes along, or the gray hair that you're supposed to dye. So there's, we have these other kinds of pressures on us that are very anti-natural. I mean, we're supposed to get old. Aging is natural. It's not a disease. We're supposed to do it. So that's a real problem.
I love you saying that because I think everybody on the panel just kind of laughed like, how are we not getting that? How are we forgetting that in the process? What are some of the most common misperceptions about being an older adult or becoming an older adult do you see out there in the world?
Well, for the purposes of time, I'm going to limit them, but there are so many. But first of all, a lot of times because of this fear of getting older and that people think we're all just going to fall apart, a lot of times older people are considered pathetic and needy. We are pathetic. Oh, I'm so sorry, and let me help you. And that's a kind of ageism called benevolent ageism, where people are trying to help, but they only see the things that they can give you as opposed to asking of you what you want to give back. And I love David's comment before about the desire to give back. We still have those impulses all throughout our lives. So that's one really big misperception about older people. Another big misperception is that we're all alike. And that we are called the elderly. When you lump us all together in a group, that takes away our individuality. And the reality is, as we get older, we become more different from one another than when we were younger, in terms of development, in terms of our experiences, the wisdom we've gathered, the skills we've developed. So we're being overlooked as this huge resource of a compendium of skills when we're stereotyped as into a particular characteristic. And that hurts society as well. It not only hurts us, and I'm 72, by the way, and I'm proudly 72. I think we should all not only admit our age, but declare it. So when we're seeing that we're all alike, that does our whole society a disservice. Another misperception is that we're technology averse. We don't like computers. We're afraid of we can't handle technology. Actually, this is kind of ridiculous, but we've been changing all our lives. We've been handling whatever technology development has come along. I ask people, what was a phone like when you were a kid? And what's a phone like now? Do you have a smartphone? And were you brought up with the rotary phone stuck on the wall with the curvy spiral cord that got tangled all the time? We have changed through all kinds of iterations. So this misperception that we're stuck in our ways, we can't handle anything new. We handle new things all the time. And it's just that we need to be taught in ways that as our brains change, if we're taught in certain ways that fit the ways our brains have changed, we learn just as well as younger people how to handle technology. And then another great misperception is that older people threaten to wipe out our economic resources. We're this, especially the term for baby boomers, we're this silver tsunami that's going to wipe out Social Security, going to wipe out Medicare. We're not a tsunami. What we are is a reservoir. We are a reservoir of gifts and talents. And so our skills are being pent up. If we would be allowed the opportunities by society to just get out there and do our thing the way we want to do it, we would not be a society of scarcity, but a society of abundance. There are easy fixes to Social Security and Medicare if we have the political will to do it. But it's blocking us from being hired in companies and expressing ourselves and sharing our gifts. That's what's holding us back. So I see our situation as a kind of a 50-50 responsibility. As individuals, we're responsible to a certain extent for how we age ourselves. We all know the rules: eat right, get enough sleep, exercise, be social, be engaged. But society has a 50% responsibility too for us, and that is provide us with the opportunities, follow up when there are reports of abuse, give us the resources that we need. And that's what I call empowered aging. When society and the individual work together, that's what's going to ultimately get rid of the ageist society that we live in. And by the way, ageism goes both ways. We could be ageist toward young people as well, and I can get into that later.
Yep, that's very true. I love the visual of the tsunami versus the reservoir, and being able to tap that in. That's just such it just kind of slaps you in the face again and makes it really simple to understand the value there. So thank you for that. Now, ageism, in my opinion, it just does not seem right for people to do that. And I'm sure I've done it myself without even knowing that I've done it, but I try to catch myself and correct myself. Are there practical reasons that we really need to change this and really make it a campaign of, okay, enough is enough?
Absolutely. I mean, and by the way, we are all ages to a certain extent because we're flooded with all kinds of messages about young is good, old is bad. So we are all ages. And by the way, children as young as 3 years old can start to absorb ageist messages. Think of the Wicked Witch and all the fairy tales with the Wicked Witch and the Evil King. All the commercials that they see of old people, the I've fallen and I can't get up kind of commercials. So they can be, and if their parents are making statements or have fears about getting older, little kids can pick that up too. So there are things that aside from the morality of it, that is just plain wrong to discriminate on the basis of age. I can give you three areas in which practically we need to solve the ageist problem. First is healthcare, which we've talked about to some extent. And we can, speak about this in detail, and others on your panel can. There are currently in the United States, there are about 7,300 board-certified geriatricians. We have a geriatrician shortage in this country. We have more than 34,000 pediatricians, but we only have 7,300 geriatricians. And there are going to be more older people than there are kids. Right now, there are more people over the age of 65 than there are under the age of 5. And we never had that in human history before. So in healthcare, we need more people who will be able to address our needs, our health needs. Older adults in healthcare many times do not take part in clinical trials for new medicines. So how do we know then the correct dose for an older person if not enough of them are enlisted in clinical trials? COVID. 90%, 81 to 90% of all deaths happened to people over the age of 65, but they had the poorest treatment in terms of accessibility to the protective equipment. In nursing homes, they were denied a lot of this equipment early on. They were triaged out of certain practices. So that's healthcare. Workplace. In the workplace, ageism in the workplace costs the United States $850 billion annually in GDP. We're losing money because of ageism in the workplace. Only 8% of companies in the United States have age as a characteristic, as a category in their DEI policies. They have sex, gender, and race, ethnicity, physical ability. Age is only included in only 8% of DEI categories. So that's just in the business world. In politics, the whole notion of a gerontocracy, that we're ruled by old people. This is what I love to talk about. We get this wrong. First of all, we should be judging people on their competence, not on their age. And there are people of all ages who are incompetent at their jobs, and there are people of all ages who are competent at their jobs. But when we talk about, are we being ruled by a bunch of old people? Well, here's what I like to tell people. In 1775, the Continental Congress, the average age of a member of the Continental Congress when our country was founded was 44. But the life expectancy at the time was between 35 and 40 years. So the average age was older than the life expectancy. Today's life expectancy is around average 77, but the average age in the House of Representatives is 58, and in the Senate it's 64. So they're younger than the expectancy age. So it's not a gerontocracy according to those values. So that's just a few places. But yeah, practically, we're losing money, we're losing people. Let's stop the ageism practically as well.
Wonderful. Last, I just want to ask you if you have some strategies for individuals to kind of counteract ageism in their own lives, and same for companies and organizations.
Sure. The first thing we individuals need to do is to be aware of our own biases. How do we feel about getting older ourselves? And that includes that internalized ageism. How many times do we say to ourselves, I'm too old to learn that. I can't really do that at my age. Which is why I love David's comment, the whole idea of going back to college. Bravo. Not having this sense of I can't do it, or what will people think? Is it age appropriate? What if I want to do this? What will they think of me? Will they think I'm trying to stay young? Here's the thing. Once you get to be an adult, there's no such thing as age appropriate. You can do whatever you want, as long as you're not hurting anyone, yourself or anyone else. Do what you want to do. So be aware of our own biases, advocate for ourselves. If we experience a moment of ageism, somebody said to me, can I check at the checkout counter? A cashier said to me, "Did you find everything you needed today, young lady?" And I said to the person, "I'm sorry. Do you have eye problems? I'm not a young lady, but actually I'm okay with being old, and you can be okay with it too." So there are ways in which we can advocate, call out ageism, just as we would call out sexism or racism or homophobia when we hear a comment like that. Say, it doesn't really apply, or that could be hurtful to some people. So that's what individuals can do. We can be out there, we can be engaged, assert ourselves, and offer and tell people what we have to offer. As far as companies and organizations, learn about the managers need to learn more about the assets of the younger brain versus the older brain. And, we could go into that, but there are skills that young brains have that they're better able to do. And as we get older, we get other skills that we're better able to do. You need young and older brains in the workplace together. They make the most productive work teams. Again, include age in their DEI policies. Put age in there. And don't support or foster intergenerational conflict in the workplace. Don't pit young and old against each other. You're all in the same place, hopefully to create the same product or to live out the same mission. Find out what everyone's strengths are. Don't categorize people. Find out the individual. Just as we need individual person-centered care, we need individual care in the workplace as well. Find out who these individuals are as individuals and what they can contribute and how they can all contribute together. So that's what I would suggest.
Wonderful. Thank you. I guess I would just add to looking at the history that our elders bring forward, because so much is focused on today and tomorrow. But how the heck did we get here? Is really important to avoid future mistakes and things. So again, thank you so much. I'm gonna pass it back to Lance.
Thank you, Lori. I want to go to Dr. Ann Kinney now. And is it okay to call you Ann?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. You're hearing all the other panelists discuss these issues with ageism and, the different areas, palliative care, emergency room, elders voice advocate. But, dementia plays a big role in all of this, right? We see it in our business where it's almost assumed if the person's elderly, do they have dementia? If they forget what day it is, just normal memory loss through aging. How does ageism play a role and affect those living with dementia?
Yeah, thanks, Lance. It's funny, we've been talking a lot about ageism, and then there's the stigma. So there's stigma with aging, and then there's a stigma with dementia. And so when you combine the two, it's kind of that double stigma. We have to, I want to echo so many things that have been said today, just such brilliance on this panel. It's amazing. But one thing Jeanette said was we have to curb our own ageism. We have all these thoughts on our own about what's wrong with aging. And I think David brought it up as well. Having those fixed thoughts will harm us on ourselves. And in fact, the studies show that those who are positive about their own aging live 7.5 years longer and are less likely to have cognitive changes, poor cognitive changes. So I guess I wanted to start with that. But when you have these ageist beliefs of our society that we see in the media, as several people have brought up, I mean, and it starts so young, as Jeanette brought out, and then you add cognitive changes. Again, we've talked about how, from a consumerism standpoint, we think just by being old and not productive, and then if you then have cognitive changes, it's worse. We're going to end up with the health problems, as well as lack of health care benefits for people living. If the earlier we know we have cognitive changes, the bigger impact we can have on changing how long we live in early dementia. And early dementia is not bad at all. I mean, most of us are very functional with early dementia. Most of us are very independent, have a pretty good quality of life, very good quality of life. And if we don't acknowledge that we put on the word dementia, or we put on the word cognitive loss, and you start to limit giving advice, giving care that is kind of top of the line, we're going to end up having cognitive changes accelerated when they could be really limited. So changes in diet and exercise and cognitive stimulation, a lot of the things people are talking about, purpose, people with cognitive changes who have purpose live so much longer. I co-wrote a book with somebody who's been living with cognitive changes for 20 years. She helped me write a book. I mean, it's because she's been an advocate for people with frontotemporal dementia for years. Her name is Dr. Webb. And so she's amazing. And so by being engaged in life and fighting all these stigmas, she's perpetuated her early stage for a long, long time. And that's what when you have the double whammy, you have to really be careful. And as Dr. Lamb brought up, sometimes you have to be your own self-advocate. So whether you're advocating for a person living with dementia, or a person living with dementia advocating for yourself, you have to get out there and be your own advocate, because our society is not going to be your advocate, and our healthcare system is, as we've brought up many times, is somewhat broken, or more than somewhat broken, and is not going to be your advocate as well.
Absolutely. How about interventions? Are there any successful interventions that can help reduce ageism when it comes to dementia care?
Yeah, absolutely. What we forget is that that education is huge. And so what I love is everyone on this panel is a huge educator, with their books, with their advocacy, with their speaking engagements. And people need to see the positive aspects of aging, like just hearing that this is not a silver tsunami, but a silver reservoir. What a great talking point, and what a great way to kind of reframe and change that mindset. And what we also know is that the earlier people hear these messages, the better it is. So intergenerational programs have been shown to be very beneficial. So when the education is early, and when the education is experiential as well. So what they've found to be the most effective education to fight ageism and to fight ageism against dementia as well, or stigma against dementia, is exposing younger people to the facts and exposing them to someone who is older, and having intergenerational programming where they come as equals to the programming and learn things together. There are programs where an older individual could be a mentor to somebody early in their career, like a college student, about career advice, and kind of keeping perspective on that really overwhelming time when you're just about to leave college and move into the workforce, and you're making decisions that you're not ready for. It's really nice to talk to somebody who's been there and done it. One thing we talked about is as people get older, they do change. And one of the things that they change in is they get more generative. They get where they want to give more. But what we have to do is help our society realize there's a lot to give and be open to receiving from somebody with gray hair.
Yeah. Yeah. Great points. Thank you. I want to talk about, resources because, a lot of us on the panel, we do educational talks, we provide resources, articles, what have you. Are there methods though that have been developed to help educate people about aging myths and promote a more positive attitude towards aging?
Yeah, I think again, those intergenerational programs, they call it the PEACE method. It's positive experience. I can't remember what PEACE stands for. That's terrible. But if you Google it, the PEACE method for fighting ageism, there's a definite template and of how to do that. I think as individuals, people who are watching, is just expose your kids or your grandkids to those positive experiences. Another thing is, as adults, we can, or as those of us who are elderly adults, we can look for ways to give back. There is the AARP has the Experience Corps. It's active in many, many cities. There's all kinds of volunteer programs that can be done virtually as well. There's all kinds of resources out there for volunteering and giving back that I think would help have more people out there. But again, we have to fight our own ageism. There's a lot of people who are aging who think, oh, I'm not worthwhile anymore. I don't have anything to give. That's absolutely wrong. But again, I love what we've heard today on this panel, and it's going to help so many people, that there's several examples of people saying, get out there and do more. You can. You are amazing. Get out there and give it back.
So it's true. Age is only a number.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
How old do you feel like you are? And if you ask most older people, they don't, it's the number is much younger, but in our society, I can say that when I went from a redhead to a gray head, I got a lot less attention. I get a lot less attention, but literally, I did it overnight because I was dyeing my hair and I quit dyeing my hair. But, COVID, I said, I'm 30 years natural red, 30 years dyed red. Maybe I'll get 30 years as a gray head, and who knows? But I'm this, pretty much from that day when I turned 60, I was pretty much the same person the next day. We just had gray hair, but society treated me completely differently.
Yeah. And that's a shame. And, we're trying to raise awareness. And
Right.
I think, like you said, I think people need to have that self-worth also and not buy into what they feel like society thinks they are or is trying to make them feel like they are, right?
Right. Right. And I think if they can come with that self-worth and that self-confidence into school systems or into volunteer opportunities, and make sure that those volunteer opportunities resonate with you. Like, don't just go into a volunteer opportunity and they say, go to a corner and fold letters. That's not the generative you're looking for. You want purpose in what you do. So make sure that you are giving back that valuable part of your reservoir that you have to offer. I wish I had something new to say. You guys have all said it all. I feel like I'm just the cheerleader to say yes. The things that Chris is doing for advocacy for people who have lost their voice in long-term care facilities, what a great place to volunteer, right?
Absolutely.
There's just but if you're into the arts, be into the arts and help we know that arts expand everyone's lives. Be the one that has more time now to go back and teach something in a school system. it's limitless. Again, it's a reservoir. We can offer so much to so many people, and all of that will help their own personal health. It will help their cognitive health. It'll help their longevity. It will help the generations behind them. It's win-win-win.
It's a win-win-win. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Ann Kinney, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and for joining us today. I'm going to turn it back over to Lori.
Well, this has just been such a fascinating conversation. I just really appreciate everyone's time. I did look up what PEACE stands for, and it's Positive Education About Aging and Contact Experiences. And one thing I wanted to add, this got brought up in the beginning, but again, I think it's a way that we can change how we look at aging is healthcare directives and wills. It's one of those things that's procrastinated. And what I find with those that procrastinate, they think if they don't do it, they're fighting age within their own body. They're not getting old. If I don't do this, then I'm not old, because it's all viewed as an end of life instead of a smart living type quality. And, I've done 2 of these recently, again, with family members. One has fought tooth and nail to get it done. And finally, in the hospital, I said, no more choices. We are getting this done right now. And so we had this conversation. And what was interesting, as much as he fought doing it and didn't really want to do it, it was so helpful for him to get that done, because he was reflective and about his life and his relationships. And the conversation changed in terms of how he wanted to connect with people and how he told people what he felt about them and how important. And I mean, it was just really wonderful to see. And not that he didn't do that stuff before, but it was at a really comfortable, sincere level. It was done really different, and everyone noticed those comments, and it also made him feel really good. The other one we did was actually just last night, and it was with the person who fought it to begin with, and it was his wife. And she was great, and she just said, I so appreciate this conversation, because no one's asked me about this, and I would like so-and-so involved, but I don't know if they would be comfortable with that. So I want this team to really manage this, but please pull this person in if they're comfortable in my medical decisions. And her husband had a really open conversation with me, being able to be part of that. And it was really quite beautiful, because she's like, I don't want to be cremated. And just all of these little things, or thinking about, do I want someone, if I land in the hospital, do I want my life extended no matter what? And she's like, well, no, I have this. And so it's going to complicate it. And, it was just, it was a really profound, thoughtful process that I think in the end gave both of them a lot of peace, that they were on the same page. And I think so often people just see it as, if I do it, I'm dying. And it's not about that. It's about communicating your individual needs and wants and beliefs and values with others who are important to you. And when you look at it in that light, it really, to me, takes the scary out of doing things like that. And then it helps a lot of these other processes that we think are a mess with healthcare and all of those different things that you're dealing with. It takes a lot of the crisis out, and it gives you a format to feel comfortable and confident to care for somebody in the fashion that they want. So that is just something that I guess I would push out there in terms of ageism, where we kind of self-invoke that and harm ourselves in the process in terms of how we personally look at aging. And we just go from, A to Z, we're alive and we're fully viable to no, now we're going to be dead, and there's a lot of pause in between there, to live life with that. I would love to ask if any of you have any comments that you want to bounce off. I mean, you all gave such fantastic input, but I don't know if any of you jotted notes of, I want to make a comment on this and make sure we discuss this. Chris, anything that you thought of? And then I'm going to go to David.
I want to thank Anne very much. People get involved in advocacy, take control of your life, find organizations, whether it's a elder abuse kind of focused advocacy group or whatever else it is. It's your voices that make all the difference in the world. Thanks, Laurie.
Wonderful. David, how about you?
Yes, what occurs to me as I listen to everyone is how each of us is coming to this subject matter in our own way. And as I said earlier, how there's these significant, contributions going on, whether, no matter who we are on this panel. Age is a chronological fact, but it's not an indictment. All right, and I think that's what we need to understand. We have to look at it if we are to age successfully, I believe, as a portal to a whole new way of living and a whole new way of experiencing life. And we have to look at the possibilities that we have, and as so many of the panel have said, the possibilities in so many ways are limitless. Now, I am 78, so I can't do what a young man can do, right? But then I don't have the desire for that. When I look at my life, my what I have the desire for is to grow spiritually and emotionally, and to learn even more about myself. And I think that's what a perspective that if older people, and you notice I didn't say old, I said older, right? If we can start to learn to look at those possibilities, it makes a whole lot of difference in how we experience in life, even if we have some health challenges, right? So the thing that I would like to suggest is that even as we get older, we need to find role models that inspire us, that help us say, yes, that's the way I want to live my life. And in my book, I talk about people like Tony Bennett, who at 88 made an album with Lady Gaga. I mean, how wonderful is that, right? Cher being asked by a reporter, don't you think you're too old to sing rock and roll? And she said, well, why don't you ask Mick Jagger? So it's looking at aging and taking responsibility. We can't help or the way others perceive aging, but we can be models to help them shift their perspective so that these people are really admirable in the way they're handling their aging.
I love that. And I think one of the things, and I don't know how this came to be, I guess it's just through the stigmas of aging, but life is about adaptation. I mean, you think of all the different things we've adapted to, from being a baby to a toddler. I mean, you can go on and on and on of all the categories. And yet we go, I'm approaching that last quarter of my life or last season of my life. And so now I'm just going to shut down. I mean, really, why would you do that? You have more skills, more experience to enjoy things, I think, at a fuller basis than you did when you were younger, in terms of who are you and what brings you joy. And it may, I know for me, I'm 65 now. It's not the big flashy stuff. It's the really small, simple little things that just melt my heart and give me comfort. And I think that's part of the ageism out there too is if you're not doing big flashy things, well, and you're not out to impress the Joneses, well, then who are you? Get out of my way, because I want to be at the top of the heap. I want to be king of the hill. And it's not, for me anyways, it's not that. So thank you, David. Anne?
Yeah, one thing that we have been talking about is like adapting to our aging, and it's important, I guess, as a geriatrician, to remind people that just because we're older doesn't mean lifestyle changes don't improve our quality of life or even extend our life, or that medical interventions aren't worthwhile. Absolutely, they are, and we can benefit from them. It is worthwhile at any age to decide, do I want to do this or do I not want to do this? What will the cost of it be to me in all aspects of my life or not? No different as we age. So while we may start racking up more chronic diseases, the medical progress has changed our life expectancy to add about 30 years. So what do you want to do with those years? Like, I think is that, but don't think this is not the time to say, oh, I'm too old to worry about my health. You're not. You're just the right age to worry about your health in just the right amount.
Great. Thank you. Brittany, any comments that you have?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to piggyback on what you were talking about with directives. And I think we shouldn't think about them as end of life directives. We should think about talking to our family members, especially when you're trying to choose who you want to speak for you and make your medical decisions, as a conversation about what's important to you, what you want your life to look like, all the things that you want to be able to do, things that would impact your care decisions. And so I think a lot of times people don't want to engage in advanced care planning because the language is so focused around end of life decision making. And that's one of the things I really dislike about templated advanced directives. They tend to tell us, well, what would a person want if they're in a vegetative state or in a coma or they're living with an end stage disease? And I think from the beginning, it's better to talk about, well, who do I want to speak for me and why? And then what does living well mean to me? What does my quality of life mean? And having those open conversations, it makes it a bit less scary when we're talking about who you are as a person and what matters to you. And if people can speak for you, and you can speak for the people that you love in that way, it's much easier to make medical decisions in real time. So, and it's not about end of life. Like we make so many decisions about our health and our medical care and all of that. Like it's decades and decades of decisions until we reach the end of life. So I want to empower people to have these open conversations and to not feel hopeless about aging, because if we're not aging, we're not here. And we want to be here. We all want to be vibrant and communicate and contribute to society. So you guys have been great. I've loved listening to all of you talk. It's so inspiring.
Yeah, it has been really informative. Jeanette.
I just want to make a couple of points, but before I do, I want to recommend a website called Old School Hub. And the website URL is oldschool.info. oldschool.info. It is the clearinghouse, the place to learn everything you want to learn about ageism. And there's a lot of fun tools on there and a lot of interesting videos to watch. So for anyone who wants to learn more about ageism, go to oldschool.info. And I just want to present another sideways look at aging and ageism. You know the phrase "over the hill." We're all over the hill, right? Okay. What does it mean to climb a hill? To climb a hill, what do you need to do to climb a hill? Well, you need strength, some form of strength or determination. You need curiosity. You need the right tools. You might want to get some advice from somebody else who's climbed the hill before you. So instead of seeing that we're over the hill and then afterwards it's just downhill all the way, this is how I like to describe it. Nobody is ever over the hill. What we are is we're at the top of a particular hill, And when we're at the top of that hill, we get to see other hills in the distance yet to climb that we didn't even know were there when we were at the bottom of the hill before we climbed it. So we keep climbing hills, climbing and climbing. So older people, the longer we live, all of us become master climbers. That's what we should work toward, being able to keep climbing and learning from the other hills we climbed so that we could climb the hills that are yet to be. Maggie Kuhn, who was the founder of the Grey Panthers, the group in the Grey Panthers in the 1970s, she said that she believed that there were 5 jobs, 5 roles that older people could play, and they all begin with the letter M. And this is how she described them. They could be mentors who teach the young, mediators who resolve conflicts, monitors who watch political organizations and civic meetings like, City Hall and Congress, whatever, motivators, people towards social justice, and mobilizers, get people moving. So those were the 5 roles: mentors, mediators, monitors, motivators, and mobilizers. That's what she thinks older adults could do, because a lot of times we have the time, we have more leisure time to do that. If anyone's wondering what to do with the remaining 35 years of your retired life, those could be some of the things you might want to think about. And then I add 2 more, which is what David had mentioned too, models and mirrors. What about people who have severe dementia or who are bedridden or who are not able to be out there in the world in the ways that other people can be? They could still be models and mirrors, models of how we treat the older people in our lives, and mirrors. How do they reflect to us what we're thinking about old age? So those are just some ideas for us to think about.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. Anybody else think of anything else they want to add after hearing from each other? How about you, Lance? You've been kind of quiet today.
Well, it's a lot of good information. Love all the guests and, just the value that they bring to this conversation. And I think it's the old adage, it really takes a village, right? I mean, if you look at the diversity of the panel, you and I, Lori, we're all working towards a common goal, and that's just to raise awareness, to help bring dignity to, death, dignity to dying, dignity to our elderly population, dignity to people that are living with dementia, dignity to the family who's helping to support them. And it really does take a village. We're trying to get the word out, raise awareness, and hopefully there won't be a need for panels like this someday in the future, because it will just be common knowledge and commonly accepted that, we need to respect our elders, and we need to respect those living with dementia, respect those who are caring for those that are elderly and living with dementia. And I just appreciate each of you for, taking time out of your schedules to join us today on Conscious Caregiving.
Right. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate this.
Thank you for joining us again here at Conscious Caregiving, where we're tackling the tough conversations. We look forward to seeing you again here next month.